Hey, this is Tom from MVP Chess. Welcome back to my series on Capablanca's best endings. In this video, we'll be analyzing ending number 4 that Capa played versus Frank Marshall in New York, 1909. So we reached this position after White's 18th move. What's going on here? Well, the key thing to notice is the pawn majorities. Okay, Capablanca has a 3v2 pawn majority on the queen side. Marshall has a 4v3 on the king side. So this should favor Capablanca just because it's much easier for him to advance his queenside majority. It's more mobile. Marshall's kingside majority, well, it's a little harder to mobilize, and also with the presence of the queens on the board, makes it a little bit dangerous to go for a plan such as e4, f4, because it would really weaken his king. So Capablanca kind of has a free hand on the queen side, which is why he plays b4, b5. Great move. Let's get this pawn majority rolling. And the strength of pawn majorities in chess generally, but especially in the endgame, is that you can take this majority of pawns and create a passed pawn. So that's simply what Capablanca is going to look to do. 3 versus 2 becomes 2 versus 1, becomes 1 versus 0. And he's going to just look to push that pawn up the board, or at the very least, force Marshall to give up some material in order to prevent its promotion. A3 trying to prevent b4, but this allows c4. So Capablanca has done a great job gaining space on the queen side. Okay. And notice not only the presence of the queens hampering Marshall's position a little bit, but also these split rooks. Okay. There is another key feature of this position, and that's the open D file. Capablanca, whose rooks are connected, is in a much better position to contest that open file with, let's say, rook b d8 than Marshall is. His rooks are uncoordinated. That's why he feels compelled to play bishop f3, so he can meet rook d8 with rook d1. But unfortunately for Marshall, Capablanca is able to capture here, and Marshall can't retake with a rook. So Capablanca has now gained control over the only open file on the chessboard. Clear advantage for black. Okay, not only because of the D file, the space that Capablanca has gained on the queen side, and also the fact that his pawn majority is mobile, Marshall's is not. Bishop f3, pawn g6, very instructive, useful move for Capablanca. Okay, he's not in a rush. Let's just play g6, give the king luft. This is the perfect time to do it. We have queen c6, and a very instructive moment in the game from Capablanca. He avoids the exchange of queens. Okay, and when I first saw this move, I thought, well, Capablanca wants to avoid the exchange of queens because with the queens on the board, it's harder for Marshall to get his pawn majority going. But it was actually something different. Okay, Capablanca could exchange here on c6, but he would lose a tempo. He would lose a tempo because the bishop would retake, and the pawn on b5 would be undefended, so Capa would have to play a6. But by avoiding the exchange, a nice centralizing move by the queen. Of course, Marshall wants to get that queen out of such an important area of the board. We have an exchange where the b pawn is no longer hanging. Okay, so watch what this allows Capa to do. Rook d1, activating the rook along the first rank, and then he's able to play a5 in one move. Okay, so instead of there being a pawn on a6, Capa's able to bring a rook to d1 and the pawn to a5. Okay, your moves in a chess game are so valuable. They are a commodity. You need to make the most out of every move. Very instructive play by Capablanca, recognizing when to exchange queens and when not to. It was all about saving time. So we have rook c2, Marshall trying to keep this rook from the d2 square. That would be a disaster, but now Capablanca can just start pushing his majority. Okay, so 3v2 has become 2 versus 1. Bishop f3, trying to annoy Capa's rook, but this rook just comes to b1 and puts pressure on this weak b2 pawn. So we've heard about rooks being strong on the 2nd rank, on the 7th rank. Of course, that's true. But Capablanca's rook is also very annoying on the back rank. Okay, putting pressure on this pawn, also preventing the king from centralizing in a defensive role because it can't make use of the 1st rank. Bishop e2, b3, so Capablanca starts advancing his pawn majority and gets his rook to a more active position. Now, Capa's got a big threat in the position, which is rook c2. So let's just say Marshall plays h4, gaining space on the king side. This would lose immediately. Rook c2, take, and notice this bishop is helpless to prevent the promotion of this pawn because the pawn promotion square is a dark square. So that's why bishop d1 to prevent rook c2, but this allows Capablanca to make an awesome breakthrough. c3, pawn takes, and in this position, I will turn it over to you. Capa to play. What did Capablanca play here? Pause your videos and have a think. So congratulations if you didn't bother retaking on c3 and you played the great move pawn to b2. This rook is overloaded, okay? It's got too much of a responsibility to defend this bishop on d1 and also prevent the pawn's promotion. So after takes, Capa has won a piece, okay? So we foreshadowed this in the beginning of the video. Capa was going to use that 3 versus 2 majority, make it 2v1, make it 1v0, and either try to promote that pawn or force Marshall to give up material. Okay, so we've entered a scenario where Capa wasn't able to promote, but Marshall only has 2 pawns for the piece. Now, watch how quickly Capa coordinates his pieces, not only to stop Marshall's passer here, but also to drum up a mating net on the king side. Yes, I said a mating net. Even with so few pieces on the board, Capa was able to whip up an attack out of nowhere. So we have rook c2. Marshall putting his rook behind the passed pawn. That's what you want to do, but Capa says not so fast. My rook's going to be behind the passed pawn. Rook c1. Great position for Capa's rook, and now Marshall's rook has become super passive, defending the pawn laterally. Capa's rook in perfect position after bishop e4, king h3, and rook c2. Wow. What a beautiful picture this paints. Capa's rook is perfectly posted on the c2 square, not only in defense, but also in attack. Beautiful rook play by Capablanca. So the f2 pawn is en prise. King g2 is not possible. So we have pawn to f4, but yikes. That is not a move that you want to have to make when there's a rook menacingly posted on the 2nd rank. Now this rook is an absolute monster. h2 is going to become weak. e3 is going to become weak later on, as we'll see. As we've already discussed, this pawn's a weakness. So Marshall's compensation, if he had any at all, is out the window. So Capa just gained space on the king side, depriving the king of key squares like the g4 square. Marshall feels the need to fight back just to give the king some air, but of course, this drops the h2 pawn. We have rook b4, pawn to f5. So rook b4 attacked the bishop, but that just allowed Capa to play f5, defending the bishop with tempo. Only downside for Capa is that it does weaken his own 7th rank, so he does have to be careful not to allow any type of perpetual check by the rook. But as we'll see, the king is going to find safe haven either on f6 or h6 from any lateral checks by the rook. King g3, rook e2. Here comes the weakness of the e3 pawn, okay, which Capa scoops up. And look how much danger Marshall's king is in now. Completely cut off along the 3rd rank. Only available square is on g5. But Capa looks to take advantage of that and deprive the king of that only safe square by playing king h6. So we have rook c7, king f6, rook d7, bishop g2. Okay. Capa is threatening checkmate in one move with rook h3. So that's why Marshall gives this check, okay, opening up the g5 square for the king. But after rook d7, Capa is just able to play king h6, taking away the g5 square, finding shelter for his king. And in this position, Marshall decided to resign. Of course, what else does white do here? If you push the pass pawn, we have mate in one on the board. Wow. What an instructive ending from Capablanca. Let's go back to the start here, where Capablanca gave us a great blueprint for handling opposing pawn majorities in the endgame. Okay, you got a queenside pawn majority. Push those pawns every opportunity that you can. It's much easier to mobilize than a kingside pawn majority is. Take that 3v2 down to a 2v1, down to a 1v0. And more times than not, your opponent is either going to have to give up material to stop that pawn, or the pawn lands on the promotion square and it's game over. Very instructive play. Model endgame from Capablanca, of course. So I hope you enjoyed the analysis of ending number 4. Be sure, if you haven't done so already, smash that subscribe button, join Team MVP. I will see you next for ending number 5. Take care. Have a great day.